Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man the same murder three? Strange things that happen here, how stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree?
Welcome to Strange Things, broadcasting from the Arkanasa Radio Studios in Laredo, Texas. And welcome to the show. I'm your host, Chris James. Tonight's show will be about cryptids. Just several of them all at once. Don't have any particular list that I'm going by. The reason for the show is a Friday evening, I'll be at a panel discussing cryptids at the Fourth Dimension. It's a podcast here in Laredo. They'll be broadcasting live at the Cultura Beer Garden in downtown Laredo. Since the topic of discussion is cryptids, I thought I'd bone up on some of my past shows dealing with this subject. Give me a refresher and hopefully some of y'all a good show to listen to. I asked just which cryptids we would be talking about, and they really didn't have a list, so I'll just go over a bunch that I'm thinking will be interesting, and hopefully we'll get through Friday night without too many problems. In Montana, back in 1886, the local ranchers and farmers were losing livestock to many predators. They had wolves and they had coyotes and they had other creatures that liked to feast on the local people's property. One particular creature was giving them a very hard time, and it was attacking in broad daylight, which was odd for most of predators in the area. Just about everybody thought it was a wolf. Those that had seen it said it was big and covered with brown hair, but it had black hair mostly across its back. Those who had seen the thing said it looked like a wolf, but it didn't look like a wolf. Well, everybody thought it was time to do something about it, and so they began carrying weapons with them everywhere they went. Israel Hutchins had lost a few cows to this beast, and he intended to shoot if he ever got a chance. Anytime one of the ranchers or farmers did see the creature and did take a shot, they never managed to bring it down. Well, Israel spent many a day and few nights out guarding his herd and waiting. Then one day, he spotted his foe. The creature was trying to attack one of his cows. Well, Israel took careful aim and fired. At long last, the marauder was down. Well, Israel looked over the body of the killer and he became confused. It kind of looked like a wolf, but then it really didn't. He took the body into town and traded it to a local taxidermist for a new cow to replace one of the beasts that he had lost. A dead wolf wasn't worth much to him. Can't really eat it. You can't milk it. So he traded it for a cow. Joseph Sherwood mounted the creature in what looked like an aggressive pose, and then he sat there staring at it, trying to figure out what it was that he had. The head came to a point. The jaw didn't look like anything a dog or a wolf would have. Not knowing what to call the thing, he came up with the name Ringdocus. Joseph put it on display in the front window of his store in Henry Lake, Idaho, where it remained until 1980s, when the body mysteriously disappeared. Where did he come up with the name Ringdocus? Well, nobody can say for sure. I guess it's an unknown name for an unknown creature. The Indians living in the area told of a creature they called the Shunkawarwakin, The Shunkawarrican is an animal mentioned in American folklore that is said to kind of look like a wolf and a hyena. If you look at the ringdocus, it looks kind of like a cross between both of these creatures. According to cryptozoologist Lauren Coleman, a Shunkawarrican means carries off dogs. Coleman suggested that the creature was some animal unknown to modern sources. Well, from December 2005 to November of 2006, an unusual-looking wolf killed 36 sheep and injured 71 more in Macomb and the surrounding counties in Montana. It was shot on November 2nd, 2006 in Garfield County, where it had killed 120 sheep. The Montana wildlife officials were unable to identify this 106-pound reddish-yellow animal. Mr. Coleman suggested that it was the Shunkawarrican. I've managed to talk to Mr. Coleman on a few occasions, but I can never quite get him on the show. He's twice as busy as I am, and, well, I'm pretty darn busy. He has that museum up in Maine to run, which I would love to go see, but that's about a 2,000-mile drive one way, and I'd have to go through New York, which I really don't want to. Traffic in that town is horrible. In Pennsylvania, November 20th, 2011, outside of Troy in Bedford County, Pennsylvania, a couple were driving along when they saw something on the side of the road. It kind of scared them, and they were both still shook up about it years later. It was about 11 o'clock at night, and they were driving on Mud Creek Road, traveling west towards Highway 14, which is near Troy. As they drove down the dark road, their attention was drawn to the left side of the road. The man who was driving said he saw some movement, which he'd mentioned to his girlfriend. The woman saw what she thought was a naked man crawling on the side of the road. Now, that's not the kind of thing you expect to see, but I've seen some pretty weird things late at night. People tend to drink a little too much and then do things that they probably shouldn't. The man driving slowed, and he maneuvered his truck into the middle of the road so the high beams were pointed towards the subject. Sometimes when you see something like that, you just can't pull your eyes off of it. They stopped the vehicle about 30 or 40 feet from the subject. That's when they realized they weren't really looking at a person, but some kind of a bizarre-looking creature that was very low to the ground. As they watched, the creature moved into a squatting position with its back straight up and down, kind of like how a kangaroo sits on its tail. The creature was holding its arms in close to its chest. It looked like it had some long claws, like the talons of an eagle. The man thought they were about 8 inches long. Look at your fingers. Your fingers are about 3 inches in length. So something that was 8 inches long would be pretty devastating if you ever had to try and fight one. The creature had a very muscular body. The head of the beast appeared to be oversized, and it looked more like a wolf. At the top of the head were 2 pointy, bat-shaped ears. The entire creature, according to the man, was covered with dull, wrinkly, dark black skin. The man described seeing some large canine-like teeth sticking from the mouth. The eyes of the creature were about the size of silver dollars and were shiny and black. The driver stated that even though he had his high beams directed at the creature, the eyes didn't reflect. He said he looked over the body during what was about a 12-second encounter, and for some reason, he thought to himself that the creature should have had wings, but there weren't any apparent. The creature moved from the ditch and onto the road as they watched. It was now about 2 or 3 feet from the edge of the road. Then, the creature's body began to stretch. It leaned forward until the arms were touching the pavement, and it looked as if it was now maybe 6 or 7 feet long. As the thing began to stretch out, it also began to move towards the couple. The creature turned its head and looked directly at the truck. It was now looking directly at them. It looked as if it had just now focused on the truck. As the couple watched, it was as if the creature suddenly realized they were watching. It arched its back and took an enormous leap off the side of the road. They said it looked like it jumped about 40 feet. The thing vanished into the brush on the side of the road. Both witnesses said it looked as if the creature on the side of the road had been in the process of changing form, growing longer, and maybe moving from a 2-legged beast to a 4-legged creature. The woman said she thought it was growing black hair all over its body, looked more like a wolf as it changed. It also looked as if it was about 9 feet long when it disappeared into the brush. The man said he would have said it was a gargoyle if it had had wings. As far as I know, this is the only report of anything like this. Now, this might have been one of the dogmen sightings. The Michigan dogman is a cryptozoological creature that was first reported in 1887 in Wexford County, Michigan. The creature was described as being 7 feet tall, and it had blue-amber eyes. It looked like a dog, but it walked on 2 legs. According to legends, the Michigan dogman appears in a 10-year cycle. The sightings have been reported in several locations throughout Michigan, primarily in the northwestern quadrant of the Lower Peninsula. 1987, the legend of the Michigan dogman gained popularity when a disc jockey, Steve Cook, at WTCM, recorded a song about a creature and its reported sightings. Linda Godfrey wrote a book called The Beast of Bray Road. She compares the Michigan sightings to a similar creature that has been sighted in Wisconsin, which has come to be known as the Beast of Bray Road. This beast is a cryptid creature first reported in 1936 on a rural road outside of Elkhorn, Wisconsin. The same label has been applied well beyond the initial location to any unknown creature from southern Wisconsin or northern Illinois. This paranormal report has similar characteristics to those reported in the initial sightings in the 1800s. Bray Road itself is a quiet country road near Elkhorn. The rash of sightings in the late 1980s and 1990s prompted a local newspaper, the Walworth County Week, to assign reporter Linda Godfrey to cover the story. Well, originally, Godfrey was very skeptical, but she later became convinced of the sincerity of the witnesses. She wrote many articles for the newspaper, which she then turned into the book. It's available at Amazon.com, along with all of her other books, which I couldn't even guess how many she's got out now. I believe it might be 18. Linda has been on the show twice. I always enjoy listening to her tell about cryptids. Her books are all well worth reading. In Louisiana, Kentucky, there's a railroad trestle that has become legendary for the number of people who venture out onto the bridge only to die when a train comes along. The story goes the victims are drawn to the location almost as if against their will. Once they're at the bridge, they walk out onto the structure, sometimes saying they have to go, as if they're being forced. The bridge is 770 feet long, and it takes the train about 5 to 7 minutes to clear it. When you first look at the bridge, you'd think it's not in use. Like a lot of railroad equipment, it's in need of a good paint job. It's a bit rusty looking, and many people have mistaken this for an abandoned structure. They are extremely terrified when a train does come along and they discover there's no place to go. This creature that lives in and around the bridge has become known as the Pope Lick Monster, since the bridge crosses the Pope Lick Creek. A lick is another term for a river or a creek up in the northern parts of the country. The creature is said to be half man, half goat, with a grotesquely deformed body. It has powerful fur-covered goat-like legs, whitish-gray face with a wide, flat nose, and very wide-set eyes. Some people have said it has short, sharp horns protruding from the forehead. Most of the creature is covered with long, greasy hair that matches the color of the fur on the legs. I can hear my dog growling in the background as I talk. According to some accounts, the creature uses either hypnosis or voice mimicry to lure trespassers onto the trestle, where they eventually meet their death. When they discover there's a train coming, they only have two options. One is to try to run from the train, which is usually traveling faster than they can move. Or the second option is to try hanging off the side of the train as it passes overhead. Like I said, it takes up to 7 minutes for the train to cross the bridge, so can you imagine trying to hang from a train trestle for 7 minutes? Most people haven't made it. The goat man is described as having an unquenching hatred of man and uses whatever means at its disposal to seek revenge. I keep saying to myself, perhaps I should edit my show like other people do and cut out all the mistakes, but I try to do it in one take. It forces me to try doing a much better job, but I don't always do a good job. Anyway, I can't imagine the goat man has a garbage disposal at his ready. Okay, now I've got a really weird thought in my mind. Anyway, there are a number of reports of otherwise rational people suddenly venturing onto the bridge, saying that they have to go. One young man went as far as to pay off 1 or 2 debts just before he left. On more than one occasion, the victim wasn't alone. It was a group that all went out onto the bridge thinking they had to go. This is not the only goat man sighting in the United States. There was also a goat man spotted up at Lake Worth back in 1969. Back in 1969, there was no fence or gate keeping people out of the area, so teenagers would drive in and park. This was kind of their version of Lover's Lane. On the night of June 9th, 3 couples were parked in an open area enjoying the cool breeze and each other's company. At around midnight, a monstrous thing came out of the dark and it attacked some of the kids. Well, they were in their cars and so they just simply sped away. The description they gave was of a monster about 7 feet tall, covered with coarse whitish hair. They said the face was like a goat, and it had horns, but it walked on 2 legs like a man. Well, from that point on, the creature kept sneaking up on people for the next several nights. The story got passed around, and soon, instead of driving out to the lake for a romantic interlude, people were driving down there to look for the Lake Worth monster. Some teens would drive down to the lake 3 or 4 times a week, always looking for the monster. One couple got what they had come for. They drove down and they parked by the lake, and then they sat there waiting. Soon, the girls spotted something coming at them. It looked mean and angry, and so they got the heck out of there. The police said they have received several reports about the thing over the last couple of months. They said that they never took this report seriously, thinking it was just some kind of a prank. Then, one day, a man showed up with an 18-inch gash in the side of his car, saying that this had been caused by the goat man. Well, this got the police's attention. Soon, the law was patrolling the area, and teenagers were kept out, mostly for their own good. Well, then, hunters began slipping into the area, looking to bag a big prize. Some of these hunters would beef up their courage a bit with strong drink. There's nothing like a bunch of drunks running around with guns in the dark to really add a bit of tension to an area. Rick Pratt, director of the Greer Island Nature Center at the time, remembers that people were coming in with wine and whiskey and beer, and they were all over the park looking for this creature. He said it was like they had their own Sasquatch. It was a party for everyone attending. Fortunately, nobody managed to shoot anyone else. On the night of June 10th, a few dozen people were at a clearing known for dumping near the lake when the monster made another appearance. It was spotted standing on the top of a cliff. It was waving its arms, making angry motions, and then it picked up a tire and threw it 500 feet down at the crowd. Well, there was a group of sheriff's deputies there, and them, along with all of the witnesses, turned and ran. Anything that can throw a tire 500 feet is not something you want to run into. They don't know of anyone being shot or injured by the drunk hunters, and there's no report of anyone ever actually being killed by the Lake Worth goat man. But they don't know for sure, since a lot of people snuck into the park unknown, and no one knows for sure if people that did go missing went missing in the park or somewhere else. Now, there's no relationship between this goat man and the one in Louisville, Kentucky. You see something that looks like it's part man and part goat, you're going to call it a goat man. I talked to Jeff Stewart. A friend of mine lives up in northern part of Texas, and he's got some goat man stories of his own from his area. Due to time restraints, I won't go into all of those, but someday I'm going to have Jeff back on the show and maybe hear some about what he's been looking into lately. He's been looking into missing person cases. But that'll be for another night. The first reported attack by chupacabras is said to have been on March 1995 in Puerto Rico. 8 sheep were discovered dead, each with 3 puncture wounds in the chest area, and they had been completely drained of blood. Well, few people are aware of reported sightings of a creature in Hamburg, Arkansas from January 1934. Ranchers and farmers were finding their livestock, mostly small animals like goats, sheep, ducks, and geese, dead in their fields. They tried tracking down this creature that was killing so much of their livestock. A group of men banded together and went hunting throughout the entire area to see if they could track down this unknown creature. What they finally spotted, they described as being a giant kangaroo. The hunting party chased this creature south from their area, unable to get close enough to fire a shot. They said that the creature hopped along on 2 legs. It stayed in an upright position. It held its upper legs close into its chest, and it had a head that looked kind of like a dog or a kangaroo. They chased this creature into the wooded area at the southern part of the county. Once it was out of their county, they kind of lost interest in the thing, hoping that it may return and maybe they could get a shot at it. The strange thing is, once the creature had been chased out of the area, the mysterious deaths of their animals stopped. They think that it had to have been that creature. Now, the chupacabras has been kind of described as looking a bit like a kangaroo as well, but with little wings on its back. Now here lately, people have been reporting something that they call a chupacabras. The beast seen running around here lately sounds more like it's a mutated wolf, or maybe it's a coy dog. Coy wolf. A coy wolf is a cross between a coyote and a wolf. One was killed just up the road from Laredo in Cuero, which is 190 miles northeast. In Texas, because our state is so darn big, just up the road is anything around 200 miles. Phyllis Canyon was finding her chickens had been killed by some unknown attacker. It would drink the blood, but leave the bodies behind. Well, one day she found a dead animal on the side of the road and sent off a sample for DNA study. No one was quite sure what the creature was. Well, several of my friends have been out to her ranch and examined the thing she has on display, and they're not too sure what it is either. You can see pictures of it. Just type in Phyllis Canyon chupacabras and you'll see this creature. It's rather bizarre looking. Well worth looking into, but I don't think this is the same creature that was reported in Puerto Rico. I'm going to take a brief pause here, drink some coffee, and play some commercials. I'll be right back after this, so don't go away. Enjoy the sound of these commercials. You're listening to Arkanasa Radio. Are you taking care of your skin, or are you going to wait and see how time treats you? Take care today by contacting Lourdes James, Independent Beauty Consultant, at 956-723-3019. Don't let time get the best of you. Coffee, nectar of the gods. And at the Organic Man Coffee Trike, you'll find coffee made the right way, one delicious cup at a time. stop on by 4501 McPherson, Suite number 9. And remember, life is too short to drink bad coffee. Did you hear a bump in the night and you think it just might be a ghost? Contact the Laredo Paranormal Research Society at laredoparanormal@hotmail.com. That's the LPRS for all your otherworldly needs. If you need to squint and hold things out at arm's length to see them, maybe you should get your eyes checked. Del Norte Optical, 107 Calle del Norte, is right across from the Embassy Suites. Stop squinting and start seeing. You're listening to Strange Things with Chris James. And welcome back to the show. Long before they called it Bigfoot, they went by several other names. Names like the Wild Man or the Hairy Man, and sometimes the Hairy Brother. The name Sasquatch came from the Holcomb word Sasquatch, which was their name for wild men. Wild men were huge, hair-covered creatures that lived in the woods near the tribes. Their basic saying was, you don't mess with them, and they wouldn't mess with you, usually. Unless you lived out there in that region that the creature was eating people. The Holcomb was a language spoken by a small group of Indians on the border between British Columbia and Washington. I hear it all the time. Don't call them Indians, they might be offended. My sister-in-law was full-blooded Ho-Chunk Indian. If I said Native American, she would correct me saying, no, we're Indians. Feather, not dot. Most of you'll get that idea. The name Bigfoot came from an incident that took place in California in 1958, the same year I was born. Jerry Crew was a bulldozer operator working near Bluff Creek. They were putting in a road. The crew worked out of a camp during the week, and they would go home for the weekends. When the men returned to camp on Monday, Jerry saw some tracks in the dirt around his bulldozer. He told people what he'd seen, and, well, some folks said that they thought he was lying. Jerry was a staunch member of the Baptist Church, and he didn't take kindly to people disparaging his name. Jerry contacted the local papers and gave them his story. He said the tracks he'd seen were 16 inches long and barefoot. They had a 45 to 60-inch stride. Now you could do this running behind a pickup truck hanging onto the tailgate, but these tracks came down a 75-degree slope, went down the road, and then they disappeared into thick brush. There's no way you're going to drive a truck through that. 2 members of the crew were from the Hoopa tribe. They told of how members of their tribe had seen a big hair-covered creature living in the woods. The creature was called the Wild Man by their tribe. When Jerry had told his story to the Humboldt Times, the newspaper started using the term Bigfoot. A subcontractor, Ray Wallace, was in charge of putting in the road. Well, he got mad thinking that somebody was messing around and interfering with the construction. Ray hired 2 hunters, Ray Kerr and Bob Brazel, and they were to see if they couldn't find out who was messing around with the workers. One night in October, they were sitting out near the road when they saw it. The thing was squatting in the middle of the road. When it heard the two men approaching it, it jumped to its feet, turned, and ran away into the brush. The hunters tried to follow, but it was just way too fast, and even running through the woods in the dark, it didn't seem to have any trouble. They had to go slow so they didn't accidentally run into a tree, but this creature just ran through as if it could see. Kerr and Brazel tried bringing in hunting dogs. One night the dogs picked up the scent and they took off after their quarry. The hunters tried to follow only to lose track of the dogs in the dark. The next morning, only a few of the dogs returned. Well, a couple were flying over the Bluff Creek area in their private plane. As they flew, they could see what looked like tracks on the ground amongst the trees. Having heard about the Bigfoot in the area, they began following the tracks. The trail they followed took them right over an enormous hair-covered creature that was standing on the trail. They circled around, tried to get another look at the thing, but when they got back to the spot, it was gone. They said that the creature looked to be 7 or 8 feet tall, and it was standing up like a man. Now, some people have said that Mr. Wallace, as he was dying, admitted to having hoaxed the whole thing. Well, that never happened. Up until his death, Ray was looking for anyone who had seen the Bigfoot and could give him any evidence. Now, he did have a collection of wooden feet in his tool shed, but none of the tracks found around the work site matched any of these wooden feet. In order to get the stride right, hoaxers had to run along holding the tailgate of a pickup. The tracks seen at the camp went in between trees and up and down cliffs. No matter how hard they tried to debunk the story that Ray Wallace had made the tracks, they just couldn't get it right. Ray was good friends with several of the local tribes. He always referred to Bigfoot as being him or her, and never it. He was known to pay out a lot of money for anyone with photographs or casts. Anyone with a story of having seen a Bigfoot-like creature, Ray wanted to hear it. Bud Walton, one of the road crew workers, said, It has been said that Ray Wallace made the tracks that Jerry Crew had found. This could not be further from the actual truth. When the tracks were made, Ray was not around. He was out of town on business. Bud said he was one of the lucky ones who actually saw the tracks the first night. Mr. Oscar Mack, a Yurok Indian elder, said the Bigfoot were run out of this county by the miners back in 1848 and 1849. Mr. Mack said before that there were quite a few of them living in the area. That is why we call it Bigfoot today. Everybody has heard of the Patterson-Gimlin film, which was taken October 20th, 1967. It is commonly referred to as simply the P&G film. The creature in the film is called Patty, after Patterson. And yes, it is a female. Roger had asked Bob to help out because, well, Bob was a genuine horseman. He knew the area, and he owned a pickup truck that could haul the horse trailer. They had to go way back into the woods away from any roads or trails. As they were riding along, looking for this creature, Roger's horse reared up in a panic and it fell over on its side, pinning him to the ground. Roger had to dig his leg out from under the horse. He then managed to get his 16mm camera from the saddlebag. Dashing through the woods trying to film the creature, Roger was quite unsteady. If you watch the PNG film, you'll wonder why it's so up and down and back and forth. Well, that's why. As he ran, Roger suddenly came to the realization that there he was in the middle of nowhere with this enormous hair-covered creature, and he didn't know what the creature just might do. So he yelled over his shoulder to Bob, "Cover me." Well, Bob Gimlin pulled his .30-30 rifle from his holster, and then he racked around into the chamber. As you watch the film, frame 352 is when Patty turns and looks back over her shoulder. That was when Bob was putting around in the chamber just to keep Roger covered. Had this been some guy in a suit, and he'd heard somebody just now putting around in the chamber, I'm sure the guy would have ducked his head down between his shoulders and ran away screaming. Or he'd have put his hands up in the air and yelled, "Don't shoot." But no, the creature looks back and then just continued walking along the edge of the creek as if it didn't know what that sound was. It started raining. Well, Bob wanted to leave because he had a job he had to go back to, and he didn't want his truck getting stuck out in the woods. Roger wanted to stay and see if they couldn't get another shot at the creature with his camera. In a compromise, they covered as many of the tracks as they could with any materials they found on hand to keep them from washing away by the rain, and then they returned to the truck so they could get across the river before the rain got too much. Now, Roger Patterson could have gotten rich in Hollywood. He could have taken his so-called Bigfoot suit out to Hollywood and showed what he could do. The folks in Hollywood would have hired him right there on the spot. Instead, Roger Patterson spent his time looking for more evidence of Bigfoot. Bob Gimlin was interviewed by a guy named Packham. Packham did the interview over the phone, and then he edited the recording so that it sounded as if Bob Gimlin said that Roger Patterson had faked the sighting. Well, Bob got quite upset with this outcome. He said what he said and what Packham played on the radio had nothing to do with each other. Now, Bob Gimlin is not a very big man, but he looks like he could do a lot of damage if you got on the wrong side of him. I can actually say I had dinner with Bob Gimlin one day. Well, yeah, there were 200 people in the room, and he sat about 2 tables away from me, but still, I had dinner and he had dinner, so we had dinner together. U.S. Border Patrol, 2010. This next creature I simply refer to as the Webb County Beast. Don't know what else to call it. A sign cutting is a skill nearly exclusive to the Border Patrol. It's a form of tracking used to find groups of people crossing the border and proceeding through the interior of the U.S. It sounds a lot easier than it is. The people leaving the tracks don't want to be found, so they just try to disguise their trail through sometimes rather bizarre means. They've been known to walk backwards down a trail. They'll brush their tracks out with a branch, or they'll cover their shoes with material. To a good sign cutter, these are just mere distractions. You're not just looking at tracks, but I'm not going to go into too many details because I don't want to give away any of the secrets. Agent Eduardo Chavez was working the evening shift when he spotted the sign of a group of about 6 people crossing Mines Road from the west heading east. He drove his Tahoe along the road to determine the direction of travel so he could alert other agents working the area. The group were what we called brushwalkers. These are folks who are willing to walk through the ranches and farms scattered about the border area en route to hoped-for employment in the U.S. Sometimes they've been known to walk hundreds of miles, sleeping where they stopped and eating what they carried. They're not to be mistaken for smugglers, traveling the same routes, carrying large parcels of illegal drugs. Now, simply by looking at the sign left from their passing, there's little hope of knowing which kind of customer you're following until you actually catch up with them. Other agents had gathered in the area and were in the process of walking out the sign. This means they would leave their vehicles and they would follow the footprints, heading the same direction as the brushwalkers. Now, following a trail that other people have put down, you're very unlikely to catch up with them because you're walking at the same speed that they are. The trick is to get people out front and kind of catch them in the middle. You don't use your flashlights, and you try not to make any noise. You don't know if the group you're walking up behind are going to be just a group of brushwalkers, or maybe they're going to be a group of smugglers. Smugglers have been known to shoot at anyone coming up behind them. Well, Eddie began driving through the ranch off of Tiendas Road, trying to get ahead of the group. As he drove, he would look out the side of his vehicle to look for their sign. Eddie spotted 2 females. They were literally running towards his vehicle, waving their arms. They looked haggard and uneasy as they hurried in his direction. Now, most of these folks, the brushwalkers, know that if anything goes wrong, if they get in trouble or they get sick or a member of their group gets sick, the quickest way to get help is to find the Border Patrol. Eddie is one of the medics. The women told Eddie there was something chasing them. Eddie had worked the area for a long time. He knew there were cattle in most of the fields, but cattle don't follow people. If you walk past a herd of cattle out on the ranch, they'll head the other direction from you. There are coyotes, but coyotes don't follow people. There are mountain lions, but you won't know a mountain lion is following you until it's too late. These giant cats can sneak up on a person and, well, then it's too late. Eddie asked these women what it was they were afraid of. The 2 women informed him that something big, like big as an elephant, had been on their trail for over an hour. They said they'd seen this huge black shape following behind them. So the group had begun to run. They ran until they had become exhausted. This caused the group to seek refuge in a thick clump of brush. They could hear the creature moving through the darkness as it circled to their position. One of the women caught sight of the green and white vehicle driving along the fence. So, her and the other woman took it upon themselves to seek the safety of an armed agent. Far better to be in the company of a man with a gun than several men without. The men, seeing what the women were doing, soon joined. They told the same story. Something big had been pursuing them through the night. The whole group were more than happy to jump in the back of the vehicle and get away from their unknown adversary. When it was determined the group were not carrying any drugs and hadn't been deported recently, they were returned to Mexico, taking their chilling account with them. Having worked the brush for 26 years, I've seen some odd things. You hear sounds all around in the darkness. If you let your imagination run wild, you might just convince yourself there are monsters lurking in every arroyo. Only if you're that kind of person. Brushwalkers spend their entire lives living out in the country. They work on ranches and farms. They know what animals you'll find out in the brush. For them to have imagined this adventure is highly unlikely. About a year later, 2011, just east of the first encounter, there was a group of what we called OTMs, other than Mexican. This is an official designation for aliens who are not from Mexico. This was a group of 2 men and 3 women. They were traveling through the ranch just to the east of where the 6 had been chased the year before. The OTMs had crossed the ranch very close to where the others had their bizarre encounter. At some point in their travel, something began to follow them. They became aware of the sound as whatever it was broke some branches as it passed behind them. At first, the aliens thought it might be a bull, but in the dim light, they spotted what looked like a large, hair-covered creature. They thought it looked kind of like a gorilla, and it was crashing through the brush as it moved around their position. The group were overcome with fear. Not knowing what the dark being might do, they sought the safety of a thick clump of mesquite, and they tried to hide. The creature began to circle their position. It would move around them, but it never got close enough to see clearly. It always stayed just close enough they could hear it. It kept the group trapped there for over an hour and a half. Imagine the fear as they lay there in the dark, watching as this tall black form would pass in front of them and then behind them. They had no means of defending themselves. Well, once again, Agent Chavez was working the area when he saw the sign of the 5 people having crossed the fence from one ranch to the next. He followed them, opening gates as he had to get from one place to another. As he was driving along the dirt road looking for the group, they spotted him and came running. It dawned on Eddie this looked a lot like the year before. Aliens becoming overwhelmed with fear after being chased by something through the brush. He asked the group for details of their encounter. He questioned each one of them separately. Then he came to the conclusion that they must have gotten their story from the other group. One group had passed on this scary tale to the next. Well, even among the people crossing the border illegally, there's kind of a pecking order. The very top of the food chain are the smugglers. They consider everybody else kind of subhuman and not to be trifled with. If an alien in the group gets too sick to continue, the smugglers have been known to simply walk off and leave them to die on their own. Smugglers have even stolen all the possessions of the people in their company, abandoning them in the middle of nowhere. I have heard some real horror stories from the brushwalkers that I've contacted that had some really nasty things done to them by the people they had hired to see them safely through the brush. Brushwalkers as a whole are decent people who are just passing through looking for work. They don't usually associate with anybody not from their hometown. The same bunch of people will travel, live, and work together the entire time they're in our country. I have caught the same group in the same area several years apart. Get to know them quite well. Well, the bottom of the food chain are what's known as the OTMs. Not being native to Mexico, they're not treated well by the authorities or some inhabitants of Mexico. The police have been known to arrest people from South or Central America, take all their money, and then throw them out of the country. If the United States is the closest border, they will throw them into our country. Chances are the first group would not have spent time conversing with the second group. The two encounters must have been factual as to what the people really thought had occurred. Is there some kind of a giant black hair-covered thing haunting the ranches to the northwest of Laredo? Each year, science discovers new and unknown creatures living in places where everybody thought had been gone over thoroughly. Only time will tell if this thing is ever seen again. I would love to go out there and do an investigation, but unfortunately, it's on private property, and I no longer have my massive set of keys to get into these ranches. Maybe I'll get lucky and some agent will get a picture of it. I was going to go over Joe Rogerio's Bigfoot sighting just to the east of Laredo, but he was on the show a couple of weeks ago, and he did a pretty good job of telling his own story, so I'll just leave it at this. Somewhere between Freer and Laredo, Texas, at about 4 o'clock in the morning, Joe passed what he thought was a Bigfoot standing on the side of the road. He was overwhelmed with a feeling of fear when he went back to look for the creature. When I was on the radio one night with J.V. Johnson, and I told him this story, J.V. suggested that perhaps what Joe had had was a dogman sighting instead of a Bigfoot. Usually when people see the dogman, it scares the crap out of them. Whereas with Bigfoot, people are more in awe and they want to get a better look, or they just simply feel a little uneasy, but they don't have that overwhelming feeling of dread that Joe had when he had his encounter. It's beyond reality radio, and if I had to guess, I would say it was about 4 to 6 months ago that I was on his show. You can find it in the archives at Beyond Reality Radio with J.V. Johnson and Jason Hawes, as in Ghost Hunters Jason Hawes. Unfortunately, Jason wasn't on the radio that night. If Joe's sighting had been the only time a Bigfoot was seen in the Laredo area, you could pretty much say, well, maybe his imagination got the better of him. However, in October of 2016, there were reports of a Bigfoot-type creature sneaking around the trees in and around Lake Alice, which is about 60 miles to the east of Laredo and about 35 miles from where Joe had his sighting. The land around this part of Texas is mostly farmland and ranching. Wide open spaces with few places for a huge hair-covered creature to hide, let alone walk around without being seen by someone. This would be assuming that Bigfoot is a skin-and-blood creature and not from some other dimension. Some people say they saw a Sasquatch and it simply vanished, like it stepped through a portal or something. Nick Redfern was talking in Jefferson, Texas one year, and he told about something he called, well, scientists call infrasound, that can cause a feeling of intense dread in anyone affected by it. He said this would also allow a Bigfoot to seem to vanish because the witness would momentarily be unable to see it. Scientists have been experimenting with infrasound for years now, mostly as a new weapon to be used against large groups of people. During experiments conducted by the Army using voluntold, These are soldiers that are told that they're going to do it, whether they want to or not. They found that infrasound had an immediate effect of causing something close to a panic attack on the subjects. This was followed by a state of near unconsciousness, as if the soldiers were asleep while still standing. Well, I hope you enjoyed tonight's show, a few cryptid stories. I had a bit more to go over, but I've already done an hour's worth of radio, and my voice can only handle so much. By the time you hear this radio show, you'll probably have already missed the get-together there at the beer garden in downtown Laredo, but if you do get down there, hopefully I'll sound like I know what I'm saying. If you're into Bigfoot and want to meet some of the folks that are looking for the big hairy guy, check out the Texas Bigfoot Conference in Jefferson, Texas, October 18th, 2019. You can find all the details at yetiornot.com/2019-Texas Bigfoot Conference. That's yetiornot.com. Till next Saturday, this is Chris James for Strange Things.
Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man, the same murder three? Strange things that happen here, how stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree?